Great, here we are. Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you. I'm very happy that you followed our invitation to this corporate web multi-loop. I hope you all hear me well, and that we won't face major technical problems during this next hour and a half. I'm the managing director of IDFC. Bernhard Weber, an Austrian, IDFC is an Austrian independent NGO in the field of business and development. And some 10 years ago, we initiated the corporate platform to strengthen the topic of business and development here in Austria. We operate in close cooperation with the support also of the Austrian Development Agency, the Ministry for Economy and the Austrian Chamber of Commerce. And we are especially proud that a good number of leading Austrian companies is also partnering with the corporate platform. Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward now to today's discussion on the challenges and opportunities in India, a country, or maybe I should say a continent that has to fight particularly hard with COVID. Many thanks to our panelists who guarantee that we will conduct this discussion with great profit. Our panelists, that is Reuben Abraham, I'm very happy to welcome you here. Jitendra Devlia from ENGEL India, Christoph Pfeifer from Advantage Austria, and Thomas Schulz from Constantia Flexibles. Yeah, that's it. Now it's the turn of Sophie Lange-Hansel, who is responsible for the corporate platform at IDFC. She will introduce the topic and the panelists. Many thanks, Sophie, for taking over now.
Thanks, Bernhard. Welcome from my side as well. Bernhard already introduced me. Just briefly with regards to what we want to achieve at the corporate platform. So we put Austrian businesses at the spotlight when it comes to global sustainable development, because we believe that they are the ones that can actually provide many valid solutions for challenges all over the world. Among those companies, a few of them are on the panel today, we try to raise awareness for new market opportunities, particularly in emerging and developing countries, because there is still a huge demand for the solutions these companies can provide. And what we also try to do is then to improve the framework conditions here in Austria for those companies that are actually investing in these often very challenging markets. So on the topic today, and the reason why we're doing this today is that many of these companies that we frequently talk to, they have been investing within their growth strategies heavily in emerging and developing markets. And for instance, India, Brazil, or countries in Southeast Asia are among the most affected countries by coronavirus. So obviously this has a huge impact on the Austrian companies. And while we hear a lot of rising numbers on the news, and we can sort of guess the impact, we really want to get a deeper insights into the dynamics today, particularly the dynamics in India. And what we will discuss throughout the next 1 to 1.5 hours will be that we first of all show, okay, what is the real impact of coronavirus in India, also with regards to social and economic development. But then we will also look at how Austrian companies are affected by the measures to keep COVID in check, and what mitigation strategies they decided to pursue, and what actually worked and what didn't work. And then in the end, we will also look, or try to look, into the future a bit and assess scenarios for ways forward with regards to doing business in India. I mean, there's a lot of talking about a green recovery that could work in some places, or building back better. So we're going to see whether there's opportunities in that regard also in the Indian market. Ben had already mentioned our trusted partners in crime that are supporting us. Today, the event is particularly supported by Advantage Austria, and I would now like to ask the Deputy Head of Advantage Austria in New Delhi, Christoph Pfeifer, on stage to briefly introduce himself.
Yeah, hello, thank you very much. I hope you can all see me well and hear me well. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Also, I have to say, I think we do not have to do so much with crime. Actually, we try to promote Austrian business here in India. Yeah, let me just also say thank you again to Mr. Weber for the nice welcome remarks and for the introduction that you gave, and also thanks to the panelists, actually two wonderful Austrian companies that are very active and very successful actually in India that are with us today. Just before I start, let me also mention one thing, because we have now been talking about Advantage Austria, and here on the slide you see actually Außenwirtschaftszentrum New Delhi, and you see WKO and Außenwirtschaft Austria. So we as the Chamber of Commerce, we have this two-brand strategy. When we are in the local markets, in our case in India, we have the branding Advantage Austria, and when we communicate with Austrian companies and with the members of the chamber, we are actually the Außenwirtschaft Austria part of the WKO, and the offices in the respective countries are then called Außenwirtschaftscenter. And yeah, with that, let me start with the first poll that we prepared for you. This first poll is actually quite a simple one. Here we only want to know from you whether you are already active in the Indian market, or whether it's sort of a new market for you. And yeah, it's actually very, very easy, answering just yes or no. Okay, can we also move to the next slide already? Yeah, okay. So the results of the polls, here's some change now. Yeah, I'm not sure now if everybody can see the results of the polls, but we are about 50-50. So yeah, it seems a mixed crowd, which is also a good course. So that we have some that already know the Indian market and some that we can maybe convince today to enter the Indian market, or that it makes sense to come to the Indian market. Yeah, let me just briefly talk a little bit about Advantage Austria, or specifically about Advantage Austria here in New Delhi. Our main office is in New Delhi, but we have two regional offices, one in Mumbai, which is sort of responsible for the West Indian market, and Mumbai, Maharashtra region. And then in the south, we have in Bangalore another office for the southern market. And aside from India, we also are responsible for Bangladesh, for Sri Lanka, for Nepal, and for Bhutan. There are a little over 700 Austrian companies that are doing regular business with India or with Indian companies and in India. And we have 153, that is, I believe, the latest figure that Austrian subsidiaries here. I just saw in the chat one thing, that it seems to be that the slides are not visible. Just if someone can check on that.
Everything's good. I think it's one.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so 153 subsidiaries here in India, and from an Austrian perspective, India is actually the 26th largest export destination So it's still quite a significant export market. And then for further reference, I just put up here 2 links. One is to the WKOAT site, where you always receive the latest news, also related to Corona or to our events, and the YouTube channel, where we usually publish all these webinars that we are organizing. And yeah, if we can move again to the next slide. We have now seen also in the poll a little shift. Is now 56% who are already active in India versus 44. And here, let me move actually to the second poll I prepared for you. And here it might get a little bit more tricky, or here we want to know a little bit more already from you. You can see already the poll, I think. So what is basically, or what was basically the hardest challenge for your company during these difficult times? You have multiple choice here, so you can also tick on several things if you want to share that with you, just for us to get a little bit an overview or a grasp what are the issues that were keeping you up. Okay, while everybody votes, I will just quickly move through some of the latest activities that we are doing. I mean, this is of course not all the activities that we are doing, just a quick snapshot of the most recent ones. We have, during this Corona times, we have started organizing these sort of community calls, which is basically online calls with a smaller number of Austrian subsidiaries here in India, according to a specific sector. So we have organized one on the railway sector, where we brought all the railway companies together and sort of enabled them to share their experience, their issues, their worries during these difficult times. And at the beginning of September, we had one on the automotive sector. So this is basically sharing platform. And here we already see one positive thing, or at least one opportunity during this Corona times, where the technology enables us to bring together companies according to one sector at the same time in one room. I mean, it's a virtual room, but still in one room, although they are all located in different destinations all over, scattered all over India. Because before it was always very complicated with everybody going on business trips somewhere and everybody in different locations. So with that, it was much easier to bring them all together and talk about industry-specific topics. Then we also have these Austria Business Circles. Now on the 17th of September, we had the first digital version of that, which is basically a networking event. I mean, the one on 17th was, of course, a little bit more on a sort of online panel or virtual panel discussion format. And it was the topic India in a changing world. So a little bit the global perspective and then the Indian perspective. We also had some high-ranking speakers. I mean, we had from India Institute of Science. We had also the Austrian Institute of Economic Research, so the WIFO. We had from Invest India, which is the agency for investment promotion in India, and then we had also two Austrian companies participating. And then just let me briefly mention that we also have newsletters, one on the local side, which is more on an ad hoc basis that we're organizing that, and then one for the Austrian companies, which is 4 times a year. Next one will be in mid-November, and the one is in German, the other one is in English. And now let me return back to the results of the poll before I finish my introduction. The largest portion, or the most significant problems, seem to have been limitations by legislation. So company and border closures, for example, travel bans, and also visa-related issues, and then followed by acquiring new customers or new contracts, and also fall in demand from the customer side. Okay. With that, actually, we can move already to my last slide here. I just once more the contact details. If you have any inquiries or questions on the Indian market, you're always free to get in touch with us, and we will support you in your activities with the Indian market. And now, without any further ado, I would like to move the presentation.
Thank you.
Ahead and give back the word to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Christoph, for that introduction. I would now briefly, some of you already realized that there's a poll section. There might be some more polls coming at you where you can just answer and according to the questions. And I just want to make you aware that in the second column on your right, there's a question section where you can actually post the questions that you want me to ask the panel, and you can vote on those questions. So I'm going to pick the ones that are most voted on. Now let me introduce you to Indian expert on the Indian market or Indian society. Reuben Abraham is now going to join me on stage. He's the CEO of the IDFC Institute, which is a think tank based in Mumbai. And they assess the economic and political dimensions of the transition of India from a state-led low-income country to a market-based growth economy. So, Reuben, thanks for joining us. And you're actually not in India, I believe. You're in Switzerland.
Yes.
But you still can give us a lot of insights on what is going on in India. So my first question, as I said before, you hear every day about the numbers rising into the millions of people in India being affected by coronavirus. But it's very, very hard for us to actually grasp the consequences of also the measures that try to keep COVID in check and why the consequences are so severe for India.
Sure. So let me just start by just giving you the numbers. So as of yesterday, the official numbers are at about 6.3 million confirmed cases of COVID. And by the weekend, I think India will cross 100,000 deaths, which makes it the third country after the US and Brazil to cross 100,000 deaths. So that's just the big number. But I think the focus really should be on deaths per million, right? I mean, because ultimately it's a very large population. So therefore, it should not be any surprise that you get a very large number of cases in India. So if you look at it on a deaths per million basis, India is at about 71 per million. So to give you a comparison there, the US is at about 650 per million, and Brazil is at about 675 per million. And 71 per million is actually even lower than Austria, which actually has done a fantastic job in terms of keeping death numbers down. Austria is at about 89 per million deaths. So in that sense, there's something weird going on with the low deaths numbers, which we don't necessarily fully understand. So that's just on the COVID front. And then on the economy and unemployment numbers, the economy in the last quarter basically shrank 24%. And my own guess is that 24% was probably an underestimate because it doesn't actually take into account the informal sector, the small part of the SME sector, and so on and so forth. So if you actually accounted for some of that as well, I suspect that the actual contraction in GDP is closer to 30%. So which is by far, in a way, the largest contraction of GDP of any G20 country. Again, not surprising because I don't know if any of you saw it, but Oxford University, the Blavatnik School, had put out a report on stringency of lockdown. And in that particular measure, India had the most stringent lockdown in the world. So therefore, it should come as no surprise that the economy completely was shattered. But I think the more important number out of that economy was, so the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, which is one of the few outfits that actually puts out unemployment numbers, their estimate in the first part of the lockdown was over 100 million people lost jobs. There's been a fairly good recovery since, but even with the good recovery, my guess is anything between 20-30 million people are still out of jobs. And this 20-30 million people probably also includes migrants who left the city. So I'm guessing all of you actually saw those images of migrants walking home and things like that. And even there, I think it's important to understand why that happens is because the social protection systems of India actually don't extend into urban India. They mostly stay rural. So what happens with migrants is if they lose their job, they don't actually have any social capital or protection that is available. And any social protection that is available to them is actually from where they're coming from. So it's actually at source rather than destination. So therefore, it's no surprise that migrants started basically walking home. And the estimate is that something like 20 million people left the big cities and went away. Again, no surprise, given that, you know, one of the sectors in urban India that massively employs migrants is construction. And in the GDP numbers, construction alone was down 50%. So it's not a surprise that that many people sort of left. So that's, you know, just to give you an overview, this is the bad news. The good news, as I said, is, you know, the death numbers for whatever reason are very low. But I think the more intriguing number out of India is the infective fatality rate. So that is, so the difference between confirmed fatality rate and infective fatality rate is confirmed fatality rate depends on the number of confirmed cases that you have, and infective fatality rate depends on the number of infections at large. So how do you get to the infective fatality rate? So we were one of the institutions that actually have been doing very large scale antibody testing in India. So we've done Mumbai, we've done Karnataka, we're about to do Tamil Nadu, very large antibody surveys. And so our survey in Bombay, for instance, indicated that and we divided in Mumbai, we divided the population into slum populations and non-slum populations. And in slum populations, we saw prevalence of COVID, prevalence of COVID antibodies of close to 57%, which means 57% of the population already had COVID, right? And so those numbers are simply not being captured in the official data. So what that basically means is your denominator is actually significantly bigger than what you think it is. So your immediate reaction, so again, if you had to ask me what's my estimate of prevalence in India, my estimate of prevalence in India is well over 60, 70 million. Okay? People have already been infected by the virus in some form or the other. Now, obviously, when you hear that number, you actually, you know, your head goes into a spin. But I actually think of it as good news, because if that many people have been infected and the deaths are this low, then that means that your infective fatality rate is actually very, very low. So in our study in Mumbai, for instance, our estimate of the infective fatality rate is between 0.05% and 0.1%, which basically means it's at the level of the flu. Now compare that with, you know, global case fatality rate, which is over 3% kind of thing. So that's the sort of differential. So that's the good news on COVID. Similarly, there's obviously an uptick in the economy because if you look at fast frequency numbers, so things like passenger car sales, you look at energy, you look at electricity consumption, all of these are beginning to swing back up. So there is clearly some sort of recovery that you can see in the fast frequency numbers, but we have to be very, very cautious here, because my prediction on GDP is, you know, so the next quarter of GDP, you're actually going to see a big spike in GDP, right? And the reason for that is simply that you're seeing pent-up demand. So you're seeing things like pent-up demand, you're seeing restocking of inventory, you're seeing base effects, and so on and so forth. So we should not be fooled if we see these large numbers going forward. So I think I'll just leave it at that. And if you want me to sort of you know, give you a forwards-looking view on and so on, I can revisit, you know, what India can look at in the future.
Yeah, actually, that's going to be part of the discussion just now. Thanks, Reuben. We already had the comment in the chat that you, if I may read it out, put numbers in a realistic context. And I think that's very much appreciated also by the audience, because as I said, it's hard to judge numbers if you hear them just from the news. And I mean, what I'm taking from it is that, I mean, there's a huge impact on the economy, obviously, but there's also a sign of recovery. What you also said is that there's a huge informal sector, huge unemployment. I'm guessing the institutional environment in India is quite complex and quite challenging. So I would now actually turn to two Austrian companies that are navigating through this complex environment in India on a daily basis. And before later, Reuben, getting you back to stage, I would just ask briefly Jitendra Devlia, the managing director of ENGEL in India, on the panel, and Thomas Schulz, who's part of the group crisis management and also vice president brand management group of Constantia Flexibles, on the panel. And just hello, nice of you to join us today. You heard Reuben talking now about you know, numbers proving that I mean, there's been a lot of economic impact due to Corona and probably the measures taken in reaction to Corona. But he also sees, you know, a road to recovery in a way. Still, I believe that doing business in India has been challenging before the Corona crisis, and it's probably even more challenging now. But before the two of you share, you know, how your businesses have been impacted by Corona and the mitigation measures you actually took, please just briefly, we're going to pull up your slides, explain what your businesses are about and how your involvement in the Indian market looks like. So we'll start with Jit, if it's okay, who's working for ENGEL.
Excellent. Thank you, Frau Lange. I hope all the participants can hear me. ENGEL has been operating in India since 1997. And I must say that from the viewpoint of a European company operating in India, they have learned many, many lessons. Let me just say a few words about ENGEL as a company. We are based at Schwedberg near Linz, and we are one of the leading plastics machinery manufacturer in injection molding machines, with many kinds of technologies, automations and systems. For people who probably, if they don't know what injection molding is, it's basically any plastics in automotive, medical, construction that has a shape. You need an ENGEL type of machinery to make it. Let me just get this slide right. So it was founded in 1945. We have grown today to a size of around 6,500 employees worldwide. In 2019 and 2020, ENGEL had a turnover of 1.3 billion euros. And you can see the other statistics. It's a very large and high-performance company in the injection molding machinery market. We are very close to the customers. We have factories, besides the main factories in Austria, also in Asia and USA. Other than that, ENGEL has, like I said to you, a subsidiary in India since 1997. So it has over 31 subsidiaries worldwide. And of course, then quite a large number of technology centers, training centers, automation centers. In India, we are present with a team of 20 engineers spread throughout India. So this is a very short summary on ENGEL. What I would like to say a little bit about, or maybe my other colleague can start on his company first before I carry on.
Okay, yeah, let's get a look into Constantia Flexibles business in India first, and then we start the discussion with everyone. So Thomas, maybe you can. Perfect.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So yes, so we at Constantia Flexibles are an Austrian founded company with a tradition and a history of over 100 years ago, and our headquarters are here in Vienna. However, I want to focus today on our business in India, because as you will see on the next slide, the business is actually very substantial for us on the subcontinent. So did I move the slide correctly? Perfect. Proud of myself. So what you see here on this card are actually our factories in India. So this means we are having 8 production sites countrywide in India, in all parts of the country, and we are employing more than 2,000 people in India. We produce as a company home and personal care as well as food products. And with products, I mean the packaging, the flexible packaging for those products. So not the goods, but the packaging for them. And what I want to call out here, because I think that is very interesting, especially for today's discussion, is that we are having a 100% local Indian management. So this means we are having today 0 expats actually in that region of the world or in the country, but everything is managed by our Indian colleagues. We, of course, from the headquarters help when it comes to organization, when it comes to creating an internal infrastructure, but this is then all done by highly professional colleagues that are on the ground in India, across all those production sites that you can see on this chart here. Here you just have a quick overview about the business partners that we are having in India. And when I talk about business partners, I mean actually our customers. So we produce packaging for all the brands that you can find in the supermarket wherever you are located right now. So being that across Europe, the US, or in that case across India. And those are all well-known brands. So one of our biggest customers, for instance, in India is Unilever. Especially in the home and personal care sector. But this, as you can see, also goes into the direction of pharmaceuticals. So we are also producing packaging for the pharmaceutical industry. And that's why we're having a very wide span here. Here, just a glimpse and a snapshot of products that we produce. So you can see it's a lot of different products in the formats that we are having. Are, for instance, sachets, there are flow packs, there's wrapper for soap, it's chocolate foil, it's the little smoothies you find in the supermarket shelves with yogurt or fruits, but it's also liquid soap, for instance, or simply a muesli bar, or in that case here, a flow pack for the muesli that you can buy. So one thing I want to draw the attention to, because this leads me to especially the sustainable investment that we took and the sustainable engagement that we're having in India, we very much believe that India is one of the places in the world where actually sustainable packaging will play and is on the verge of playing a more important role than in many other countries of the world. And that is coming for some as a surprise. But for us, this was and is a huge opportunity, given that the government in India is very, let's say, or is trying very hard to turn India more and more into an eco-friendly country or into a more sustainable country. And that's why what you see, for instance, on this slide is material and packaging that we have produced and that we have developed actually in co-development with our R&D colleagues and center in India, that is 100% recyclable. And that is one of the things that is very unique on the market. And
Thomas,
this is,
Thomas,
yeah?
Sorry, may I interrupt you here?
No,
because I think the whole sustainable impact topic we're going to touch upon a little bit later.
No
because
problem.
I would first, go step by step.
Go ahead.
And also now ask the rest of the panelists back on stage again. So Reuben, if you may join us again, and Christoph as well. Because my question now, before we talk about sustainable impact and recovery, would be, I think Christoph is coming as well, would be to you, Thomas and Jit first. So we heard from Reuben, of the huge impact of Corona in India, but how did it actually affect your companies? You're both on the ground, you're very close to your consumers. What were, the immediate impact? So Jit, maybe you go first. And may I ask, someone has the microphone on and it's very noisy, so if everyone could mute while the others speak, would be great. So Jit, tell us about how you managed.
Thank you, Frau Lange. Yes, we heard some very, very large numbers from my colleague in Mumbai about the Corona statistics, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that India is a very diverse country. A very learned global Indian said to us once that in 1947, when India got independent from the British, 500 countries lost their independence because they became India. So India is a very, very diverse country. Let's do a poll to see how diverse India is. The question is very simple. How many languages are actually written as Indian languages on an Indian rupee note, currency note? Just submit your vote and we'll see. So the point.
That's unfortunate. Maybe because we have the president of ENGEL as well, who of the META region, so the region Middle East, Africa, Turkey, and India. So maybe I could ask Frank Schuster on stage to briefly take over. He's getting ready, and maybe he could just take over from Chit to talk a little bit.
Hello to everybody.
Frank,
Thank
I hope it's fine
for...
that you jump in. So can you tell us a little bit about ENGEL, how ENGEL was affected? Chit was just starting. So can you give us a little bit of insights into ENGEL in India?
Yes, of course. ENGEL, I think, as every other company, was hit it hard by Corona. I mean, the most problems we had was because of travel limitations. So we could not do our business as usual, because we have in India a great team. But if it comes to more complex projects and orders, also people from Austria have to come to India and support our team there. And in the crisis, this wasn't possible. So we had to do everything via our team in India. Chit is back, so...
Yeah, but please just stay on stage and join the conversation.
Yes,
so,
no problem. And the second thing is a big portion of our Indian revenue is generated in automotive industry. And not only in India, but worldwide, the automotive industry is in a structural crisis. And this already started before COVID, but Corona accelerated it. So we haven't had hardly any cancellations, but a lot of projects had been postponed to the future. But nobody knows when this future will start. So yeah, we have heard from Reuben that already we see some recovery in the Indian industry. We can confirm this. So automotive is also going back to generate some new projects for us. But in general, at the moment, I would say it's still hard, and we are fighting each and every day to get our feet on the ground, and in particular to stay with our customers and support our customers within their daily fight.
Chit, do you want to add something from the perspective, the local one?
Yes, I can. I mean, I just carry on from when the internet gave up on me. The correct result is 17. There are actually 15 languages written on the currency note on the side, and then you have English as the Hindi and English as the main language. The point I'm only making is that the effects in India are so variable. It's almost twice more variable than all of Europe put together. We have regions where there is no corona. We have urban centers where we have huge numbers. And the biggest problem our government has is to stop people traveling and spreading it. I think Reuben would agree with me. This is one of the things that's worrying us. That's why there are a lot of limitations on there. Adding to what Frank had said, the first quarter was a complete shutdown. April, May, June was a complete shutdown. Then, because ENGEL's main customers are global customers or premium Indian and global companies, very organized companies, they started off very quickly to ramp up the productions. So our projects in terms of new business are postponed, but we are extremely busy supporting our customers with service, maintenance, and spares. And this is the difficulties of traveling, that our engineers cannot really get to the customers quick enough. So we are now relying more and more on internet-based tools. But I must say it's getting better and better. We are able to fly everywhere now in India, not yet abroad, and things are getting better.
Thank you. Now, Thomas, you're part of the crisis management team at Constantia Flexibles. You have a huge site on the ground. So what were the immediate effects of Corona? And maybe you could talk about how the measures Constantia took to actually keep Corona in check and the impact on the employees. We can't hear you. You have to unmute your mic.
Okay, now it should be possible, right? Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, so the difficulties that we had, or the challenges, were different to the ones that we just heard. So the main challenge for us was we are producing in India with Indian people, with an Indian workforce. So when we came to the complete lockdown, it was the case that our workers were not able to come to the factory. So the police was basically stopping, people on the road. They were closing down roads, and you can imagine in India it is not an individual movement, so one single person coming to the plant, but it is basically buses that bring and carry people to the plant from collection points. So those were not working. This meant that the police was not letting those people through because it was a complete lockdown. So what for us was the most difficult in the beginning was get our people to work. Secondly, and that was in parallel, with a complete lockdown, it was our main mission to have basically the right to keep production running. So we had the luck that we were very quickly considered as an essential industry because we are producing goods for the consumer and for the pharmaceutical industries, and therefore we had that exception. So that gave us, that possibility to keep our production running. Secondly, get the people to the ground, to the production ground. So that meant we had to, basically get the right forms from the government, from the local authorities. All this happened or would not have been possible with a centralized management from Vienna alone. So basically, it was the biggest luck for us that we have a local management on the ground that understands how local authorities are working. They were basically in constant contact with them in order to ensure what I just said, opening up the factories, letting our people in, giving us exceptions and all this. So that was only due possible to that. Of course, we tried from here in Vienna to influence that, but that was very limited. So that was a big, big luck actually that this happened. What we then did, or we did actually in parallel, and if you could show my slides, I brought you some pictures from the Indian plants where you can actually see what we did on the ground to keep our people safe. And there we go. And this is the most important. Now, you all on the call probably today have been in India, so you know that India is different to European countries. So the measures that we show here, some of them might feel like, well, that looks pretty normal. Well, I can tell you it was big work to get them on the ground there. So it started by disinfecting hands before entering the plant, by having temperature checks at the entrances of the plants and also inside the facilities, disinfecting sprays around, disinfecting the machines, introducing what social distancing means. So what does the concept mean, especially in this culture, was very exciting to do so. Moreover, having a lot taking place, like masks having been, having been available for the people. Some things that I have not on this chart here, but I found them very interesting, was we were also providing special dietary measurements. So the Indian colleagues, for instance, introduced a special mix of herbs and fruit drinks that, helped the people, being it on a psychological level, but also in parts, on a physical level, to keep them safe and healthy. So we introduced a number of different measures, just with some here that, basically ensured that our people are safe and healthy. And those measures are still in place. Yeah. So this is what we did concretely for our workers, in parallel to bureaucratic things like work permits, having those on the transportation trucks, having those in hand to get to work, and having basically a constant line to the local authorities. All this to, in the end, supply our customers with our goods to keep the economy and the social scheme running.
Thanks, Thomas. I like that you, besides showing what actually happened on the ground, also mentioned the more strategic level of being on the ground, which was a valuable success factor in terms of supporting resilience. Maybe to all of the panel, particularly also Jit and also Christoph, maybe you can give an impression, and Reuben, please join the conversation. What do you perceive are the most relevant factors to actually create resilient business models or resilient businesses, also in terms of when you look into the future? I mean, what did you learn from this crisis now in terms of doing business in India that would help you to be more resilient to shocks like this in the future?
Yeah, if I might start here already, and if I can also maybe add something to the previous question when we talk about impact on Austrian companies, we have seen it quite nicely summarized by two different companies what were issues and hurdles. I would also like to add a little bit more the broad picture to that, and we see sort of the initial stage when it was short-term or immediate problems that were coming up, and then medium-term, or what we are actually right now also still some concerns for Austrian companies. So as mentioned, yeah, forced shutdowns was a huge problem for Austrian companies. Oh, we have lost the Jit now again, but I hope he will join us again. So forced shutdowns of production facilities and production lines was one of the issues. Then also, like it was mentioned, also the commuting topic. So getting the workers actually to the factory, because not everybody can do home office. No, in production and manufacturing, you have to have the workers there. So that was also a little bit tricky sometimes between crossing state borders, or getting all these licenses and permits. And then also related to that, sometimes the communication with authorities was also complicated, because the authorities were actually in home office, so it was difficult to reach them. So this was in initial stage one of the problems. And then of course supply chain. I mean that was, I think, a global issue, but also here supply chain management and disruption of supply chain was a huge topic. And then also actually at some point during the lockdown, the Mumbai port was de facto non-operational, so that the goods could not be processed anymore, that you could not get the goods out of the country, you could not get new goods into the country. So that was also a huge problem for some Austrian companies who kind of had their goods stuck and were forced to take that into the supply chain disruption then. And in the very beginning also, of course, all this repatriation of Austrian nationals. There's also many expats here. They had to be repatriated to Austria. That was also one of the initial topics.
May I interrupt you for a brief moment? So there have been all those challenges. Can you tell us how was the reaction of Austrian companies? Is there a tendency to actually pull out of the Indian market, or are Austrian companies, for instance, like ENGEL and Constantia, who are actually on the ground with their own sites, resilient with regards to this crisis? What would you say?
No, actually, the good thing, or the positive thing, is that we don't have any indication that Austrian companies are now pulling out completely of the country. So already entering the Indian market is actually quite a commitment, and it's sort of a long-term strategy. I mean, compared to many other countries, when you come to the Indian market, you have to have a long-term plan. It's not something that you set up in 1-2 years. You have to have already this long-term commitment, and so the companies staying committed to the market. I mean, we have had one case actually where one Austrian company that is already present, but they wanted to set up a second production facility, an additional production facility. And of course, I mean, that plan has now been put on hold. But I mean, that's understandable that under current circumstances, when you have still travel restrictions and you cannot really predict anything. I mean, also in Europe, I would say it's very difficult to predict something 2 weeks into the future, whether you can travel or if you have to undergo quarantine again. So it's a little bit complicated to plan that ahead. And I mean, what we are actually seeing right now as further issues with Austrian companies, or that Austrian companies are suffering, is when it comes to assembly or maintenance of machinery. So again, this whole travel restriction related issues, and then this whole insecurity, whether it's possible to test yourself out of quarantine, or you still have to go under quarantine, this whole paperwork with the test, online registration, but then do I get the result whether I have to go in quarantine or not before I enter the plane in Vienna or not. So there are many practical hurdles on that side. And as has been already mentioned before, I believe also, or at least in the poll, it was one issue Austrian companies are facing, but that's not only related to India, is actually the problem or the difficulty of acquiring new customers. So that seems to be a little bit difficult at the moment. And one thing I just want to add here, that because I think it's very often forgotten, is also when it comes to IT security or cyber security, because now many companies have been shifting to home office and many things have been digitalized. And it has been done in a very quick way. So this aspect, I think, is kept out, and is also one thing that in the at least in the medium term should be taken into consideration.
Yeah. Thanks, Christoph. I would now like to include Reuben again in the conversation. And you mentioned before that right now there's already light at the end of the tunnel, sort of. The economy is partly recovering. Now, I would be interested in, because there's this very blunt saying that in every crisis there lies an opportunity. Do you actually see some sort of opportunity that emerges from this Corona crisis? I mean, there's a lot of talking in Europe, particularly about, green recovery or even building back better, which seems to be a bit far-fetched in a way. So what's your take on this?
Sure. So before I do that, I just want to address a couple of issues that Jit and Christoph brought up. So Jit is right about the heterogeneity of India and the fact that it's an extremely diverse country. But it's precisely that I want to actually highlight. Given the disparity of spread and so on, the economic damage was actually not created by coronavirus. It was created by a lockdown that was national, right? So you can have high heterogeneity and you can have some places with more cases, some places with less cases, but that's not how the lockdown was implemented. The lockdown was implemented even in states that did not have a single coronavirus case, right? So that's important to sort of get at as well. Christoph brought up the point of the Mumbai port and the supply chains. Now, that's something that we actually work with the government on. So here's what happened. And this, by the way, is an ongoing problem. Is the most important thing when you go into a situation like this is that you get your crisis communication spot on, right? And you need to have a way to communicate all the way down to the, to the last mile, so to speak. So it's one thing for the Home Ministry to say X or the Civil Aviation Ministry to say Y, but the last person on the ground needs to understand what the ministry is actually saying. So what happened in the case of the port was basically the ministry had issued a certain number of orders, but the way it was interpreted by the policemen at the port was completely differently. They didn't actually understand the spirit of the notification that came from the ministry. So the police and other people on the ground were basically pulling drivers out of their trucks and preventing trucks from moving and all kinds of things like that, which were not mentioned in the Home Ministry documentation. It actually very seriously makes the case for why crisis communication is extremely important inside of policy circles, inside of government, especially at a time like this. Obviously, it's important within business as well, but it's even more important within government. And to this date, the Indian government hasn't got this right. You still, in places like Mumbai, you have notifications that go out, which are pages long, and nobody understands what it's saying. It's basically saying 5 shops to the northeast corner of this street can remain. Nobody understands stuff like that, right? So you need to massively simplify, or it will almost certainly be misinterpreted at the last mile. Now, to come to your question, what's the positive spin on this? I think positive spin on the economic side is basically, and this is just my sort of interpretation of events, is that partly because of COVID, and the reason because of COVID is basically nobody wants to concentrate their supply chain risk in one country any longer. So if you look at pharmaceuticals, for instance, and you look at APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, so even a country like India, which has a very large pharmaceutical sector, if you look at drugs like paracetamol or ibuprofen, vital drugs, about between 70 and 90% of our APIs come from China. If you look at places like Europe and the US have not manufactured APIs in over 15 years. So the question to ask is, are you going to take on this risk ever again of concentrating all your risk into one environment in a fragile global supply chain, right? I think that's going to lead to a certain amount of rethinking. And the second thing that's going to lead to rethinking is the trade war. So irrespective of who wins the US election, I think US attitude towards China are going to harden. And that is basically going to lead to massive friction. And in my mind, that will lead to a sort of restructuring of global supply chains. And in that restructuring of global supply chains, there's a big opportunity for India. Now, having said that, it's not like this opportunity wasn't present in 2019, right? As wages were going up in China, there was an opportunity to move as well. Nomura, the Japanese bank, actually did a analysis of this. They tracked about 50. So this is before COVID. They tracked 52 companies that were leaving China. The supply chains were leaving China. Out of those 52, 26 moved to Vietnam, 3 moved to India, right? So what does that actually tell you? What that tells you is that there is some fundamental ease of doing business problems in India that need to be addressed. So we can talk until the cows come home about what the market potential of India is and the fact that there are these big global opportunities, but ultimately India needs to fix its problems. That's the only way this is going to work. And to fix your problems, you have to first admit there are problems. And that's the other problem that you have currently is that, to get out of a ditch, you need to admit you're in a ditch. And very few people seem to be capable of admitting that you're in a ditch. So that's on the economic side. On the more sort of social side, I think the two things that are going to, certainly my hope is that what this crisis has really exposed is that the emperor has no clothes. So you need to make sure that from going forward, social protection in India is no longer a rural phenomenon. It has to be an urban phenomenon as well, because you're okay until something like a pandemic hits you. And then when a pandemic hits you, you realize that you're basically completely caught with no recourse. So I think you need a much, much better social protection system in India that takes into account that there are also poor, vulnerable people who live in cities. I think that's going to be a big change. And then I think the other major change is that there's going to be a recognition that health, especially public health, really, really matters. And there needs to be serious public investment into public health. So again, just for the sake of people on this call, what is happening right now is that all the investments that are going in are actually going into health care, which is the curative side of health, not into public health, which is the preventive side of health. So I think that mix needs to be changed now, and the government needs, and only the government can make that investment. I mean, the private sector cannot make investments in public health by definition. So I think that also needs to dramatically change on the health and economic side.
Thank you, Reuben. Before turning to the questions of Arnold Chu of the Vienna University of Business, I would just briefly ask Thomas and Frank and also Chit if you want to answer. So one of the takeaways of what Reuben just said is that COVID gives an impulse or pushes the diversification of supply chains. Is that some learning you had in your companies as well? Also with regards to certain regional focuses of supply chains, or?
Shall I? Okay.
Please just talk.
I would say so. Yes, of course, because what Reuben said absolutely hits the point. at the moment, the supply chains are very much concentrated to China. We have also a production site in Korea. But of course, being an international supplier, we need to diversify. And the crisis brought, thanks God, we haven't had major problems in our supply chain. But you never know when the crisis takes longer, what will come. So also we are rethinking our global footprint concerning supply chain. We are bringing things back to Europe, but also we are having in China and in Korea our production sites that are also depending on European supply. So although this is being rethought at the moment, and of course India plays a role in that. Yeah, that's the one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Thanks.
I can add something to this. Just saying that the other side of supply chain, looking at it from another angle, is in our case we produce in India for Indian customers. So the supply chain does not stop by bringing the goods into our factory where they are, basically taken and worked with. But what is an opportunity, or as you were saying, light at the end of the tunnel, but a positive effect for us was that our customers in India cherished the fact that we were their neighbors in the same country. So that enabled us to deliver our goods to their factories, basically, I would not say on time, but with very little delay, because we didn't have to import from other markets around India, being it from China or from elsewhere. So this for us was definitely a very positive outcome of the crisis, is having feedback from our customers saying you were reliable, you were responsive, and this in total fostered our relationship, because you were acting like a local global player to us versus somebody abroad with less focus on our country.
Thanks a lot. I would now like to briefly refer to Arnold Schulz's question that I think picks up a point that Christoph was mentioning about the benefit of decentralized management that COVID actually showed, I think, in many regards. But the increased use of digital communication to data enhances the possibilities of headquarters to interfere with local affairs. What will be the outcome for the management of international operations? So that might be also a consequence on a more strategic level. Do you see that? You can actually read the question yourself if you click on the question section. So I don't know whether, Thomas, you have a perspective on.
Sure. I mean, in our case, as I mentioned earlier, we from a central level, so from a level here in Vienna, we are very little interfering, to be honest, with those things with the local authorities, but we leave that to our local management. What we have heard here, though, is that it is still an door-to-door appointment way of making, negotiations, or to making to getting approvals in India. So we did not have that you need to get an appointment in a virtual way, but it was about getting our people to the offices of the local authority of whatever stage that was. Yeah. Of course, this changed more and more and is changing more and more into digital tools, but, and this is maybe an insight from ourselves, this is not happening here from Vienna, but this is taking place with the local management, with the local authorities.
Frank and Jit, what's your perspective on this? It's like decentralized management taking over, and actually COVID pushing, the interference of European headquarters in other sites, or?
I have a slightly different take, maybe because of the industry that we are involved in. We are basically engineering industry. Our center of excellence is in Austria, and our engineers, our teams are sitting there. And if you are sitting in India, you're out of mind, out of sight. What the digital revolution has done for us is it has integrated us into the system. So today, if I have a big project, because my global customer is taking his supply chain out of China and putting it in India, I am very close to my engineers in Schwedberg. So it is a very positive thing. I would say it's a positive thing and not interference. Because in the past, it was really difficult unless you fly there and sit down and have a meeting, things wouldn't move. And today it's easy. send a Microsoft Team invitation, and if he doesn't turn up, complain to the boss. It works.
Yeah.
I can only underline what Jit has said. COVID changed a little bit our business world in this direction, that it's now being accepted that we have conference calls also on the engineering level and even on a negotiating level. In the past, it wasn't. So we had to fly to wherever to support our colleagues in the country at customer side. Nowadays, because of COVID, it completely changed and it's accepted. And it makes the life more easy for us being in the headquarters, but also for the people at site, because they can involve us at any time they want. Yeah.
Thank you. I would briefly like to, at the end, turn to a point that we as a think tank always like to stress and elaborate on. The point of companies contributing to sustainable development. So I've been discussing with Reuben before this workshop that in light of so many people losing their jobs and the huge informal sector and the economic downturn in India, there's probably not much talking about a green recovery or building back better in terms of I don't know, supporting renewable energies or sectors as such. But we heard what building back better could mean in social terms. My question to you would be like, here's companies that are that have very strong roots now in the Indian market. Where do you see that actually your companies will contribute to recovery, to having a sustainable impact based on your core business in these markets? And maybe Christoph, you can then add to what view you can share from the broader spectrum of Austrian companies. Please just talk.
Okay. No, we one of the most important thing about ecology in India is we have learned through experience that weather affects us. If you see the fogs in Delhi, it affects us. And what we as a company, as a Western European company with state-of-the-art technologies, what we can do is help India to produce goods and use the raw material responsibly. We talk about circular economy in plastics. Maybe Frank, you can say a few words on that. That's a big movement in Europe, but it's coming to India.
Yes. I mean, anyway, plastic is under pressure worldwide because if you litter it, it swims. So it's go to the rivers and ends in the oceans. Yeah. Nobody likes it. Not us, nobody. So what we can do as a plastic machine manufacturer in converting plastic, we can offer solutions that makes it easy or more easy to use recycled plastics. So therefore, we are working on solutions that are offering our customers the possibility to use recycled materials. Of course, the task of the government of the countries we want to use this technology is introducing a system that is collecting this plastic. Yeah. Otherwise, we cannot reuse it. I mean, Thomas had said before that they have generated or designed a 100% package that can be recycled. This is normally the task of our customers, and we are supporting them with a technology to use then this recycled plastic. One technology we have shortly introduced, we presented at K-Show, is called skin melt. We are able there to use about up to 60% recycling material and still have the property of virgin material plastic, what is, for example, in food packaging, one of the keys. Yeah, you cannot get recycled plastic in contact with a food nor with medical medicine. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the developments we are in at the moment, and it would get too much into technology to explain this, but this is really something we are working on, and as well as energy efficient equipment. We are working on energy efficiency on our machinery for the last 20 years already, introducing fully electric machines, making machines more efficient. in terms of the drives of the machine, but also in terms of converting plastic into melt.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
if I can,
That's
if
a
I
good
can
example.
jump in here,
Thomas?
or build on that, because exactly what you were just saying is, and if I may see my slides, then I'll show you exactly where we are trying to close this loop that you were describing, because having the material on the one hand, I'm going to navigate one slide further, and until it ends up in the hands of the consumer, you need exactly the producer of packaging that enables its products to be recycled. So this is what we did. So we exactly developed a product, a mono material product that can be recycled. And only if a product can be recycled and a recycling industry makes sense or comes into place. Yeah. So what we've done, and this closes the loop, Sophie, back to your question of sustainable engagement, and also the question of what is sustainably done in India. We have just actually opened in November last year a new factory in India, a double-digit million investment in India that is producing nothing else but recyclable packaging, and it's a world's first in that respect. And you know, and nicely what we are doing here is employing 200 local people, you know, also qualifying them to operate the machines that the colleagues on this call are producing, you know, to operate exactly this development from India towards the world. So this is a development that we have started in India, and we will bring it from there to other parts. Yeah, and you know, proven by, you know, for instance, the Indian a central institute there for plastics engineering that has said, yes, this is recyclable, this is a great material that will bring the society forward in that respect, is something that makes us very proud. And as said, this is all happening in the core of India, in the city of Ahmedabad. So just as an example of sustainable development happening on the ground.
Thanks, Thomas. That's two very good examples of what I meant when I talked about how Austrian companies are very well equipped to actually provide solutions to challenges in many terms. My question now would be to you, Christoph, because for me that's also one confirmation of why it's important that Austrian companies stay involved in emerging markets, where they transfer their know-how, their expertise, their technologies. So my question to you would be, where do you see that companies will probably need much more support now that COVID hit many of these countries and set them back, India as well? Where do you see that Austrian companies will need support, you know, of the Chamber of Commerce, of institutions in Austria? You know, where could the framework be improved to help these companies and give incentives also?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Let me just add also to this sustainability character, since there has been a recent study by the European Business and Technology Center. They did specifically on that, where European companies can chip in India when it comes to sustainable development. And they identified actually four main areas. One is waste management, the other one water resource management, then we have mobility and infrastructure, and then finally, of course, also information and communication technologies. So when it comes to waste management, it's especially technology and know-how when it comes to mixed waste, then also the recovery of resources, especially when we are talking about energy, and recycling of e-waste. So this is actually a field where Austrian companies can engage. And when it comes to water resource management, it's basically about proper irrigation. So technology and know-how on proper irrigation, more in agriculture field related, but we also have from the Austrian side some companies are very capable in that. And here is also maintenance and training will be a quite a significant point. Yeah, this whole mobility and infrastructure, basically we talk about urban technologies, we talk about smart cities, we talk about lightweight rail, we talk about tunneling for metros. So this is anyway a wide field, and Austrian companies are very well adapted or very well established in that field. So here's also a huge opportunity. And then the last point when it comes to IT or ICT, yeah, with this rise of remote working or this so to say going digital, so also here IT and software related companies have quite some opportunities. And now I think you were talking about the regulatory framework or the so to say framework that should enable India to attract more of this, like Reuben mentioned, that there is a global talk. Yeah.
May I interrupt? Also from an Austrian perspective, I mean, on both ends, and I would be interested in what the companies or representatives of companies have to say. How can we keep business relations alive between, Austria and India? How can we actually enhance them and support them and increase them in terms of, also supporting Austrian companies contributing in a sustainable way? So that would be my question.
I mean, from our point of view, one thing that is the biggest challenge is basically an unstable position of the local government in India. So what I mean with that is, I give you the example. When we took the decision to invest into this huge factory in India, it was a clear line of the Modi government to say green strategy. I don't know what I forgot they had a term. But make India a greener place. This was a clear directive, which we took as a great opportunity, making a huge investment exactly in this field. Now, in the recent year, we saw that the government is pulling back from that, and the emphasis lies on different things, not related to COVID, but pre-COVID. And this, of course, makes it a little bit difficult, because once you take a huge investment, this is nothing that pays off in a short term, but it pays off, mid or long term. So one thing, or one plea, but plea is a difficult word to use here, but let's say one thing that would give us security is long-term commitments versus, short-term commitments. And I see, the other participants nodding their heads. This is, at least from our perspective, something that would help us tremendously.
I can only underline what Thomas had said. Yeah, of course, stability and long-term secureness is one of the most important things. Since we don't have a production facility yet in India, it's not the biggest problem for us. For us, is stability is always a must. Yeah, because otherwise other companies don't invest that are buying our equipment. And of course, for us, it's the help of like ÖKB for financing that enables local companies to go to invest into expensive equipment. Because as we know, China is around the corner, and the Chinese are our biggest competitors in Asia, not only in India. And we have to fight against them. What we are offering is higher productivity, high tech, but also on high cost. And therefore, we need support as well. And if these border conditions are fulfilled, we can do good business as we had done in the last 33 years. We are growing in India, and we are more than sure that we can grow further if these border conditions are fulfilled. And what's said before, we have never thought in the corona crisis to step out of India. In the contrary, we want to enforce our business in India.
That's good to hear. Christoph, maybe you can also comment on what maybe Advantage Austria is doing and will do in the future for Austrian companies in the Indian market. And then Reuben, I would ask you to maybe have a final perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to add some points here. Also, it's all correct what you two mentioned. I mean, we are also doing actually a survey among the Austrian subsidiaries on a regular basis, twice a year, and this point, like predictability of economic policies, is always one point that comes up very high, if not to say the highest one. So because companies need stability, they need to be able to plan into the future. So that's one very big aspect. Then of course the fight against corruption is also always one topic that comes up, and when we talk about this regulatory framework that has to be handled, so to say, and then taxes and customs. And now when we talk about what Advantage Austria, what we specifically do for Austrian companies, I mean, we have basically three parts where how we support Austrian companies. One part is coaching, the other one is information, and then the third one is events. So with events, we organize business delegations, business missions, Austria showcases, and all. So we bring actually the Austrian companies to India, to the country. I mean, now it's a little bit more difficult to bring them physically here. So we are working on developing digital event formats and trying to find suitable events, digital events where you also have this networking effect, because that's actually the most significant aspect. And then of course in the coaching aspect, it always depends on the Austrian company. You know, if it's a company that is not yet in the market, that wants to enter the Indian market, then it's more of a hand taking of the Austrian company and bringing them into the market. And if it's a well-established company, then it's more different matters where we support. I mean, one aspect, especially now that we see now actually a little bit after the lockdown and as a response also to the lockdown measures, is that many local companies also have cash flow problems, and that in turn creates problems for Austrian subsidiaries or for Austrian companies who cannot collect the money, and then they have the financial problems. So also there we support them with this, so to say, money collection. I mean, we are not in Kassa Moscow, of course, but we try to support also in that case. And I mean, we have a network of lawyers, of tax consultants. And one aspect that also always gets mentioned in the survey where we can really heavily support Austrian companies here in India is actually arranging these meetings or interventions on ministerial level or with authorities, because here in India is still important to get these meetings with certain government officials, and here we as a part, we are not only Advantage Austria, we are also Austrian Embassy Commercial Section here, so and another name and another we are wearing.
A lot of structures,
yeah. So, but also that's one thing where we can add a lot of benefits to the Austrian companies. And under normal circumstances, this Austria business circles, where it's actually also again about networking for the Austrian subsidiaries with network partners like lawyers, like tax consultants, and then also incoming people from Austria and from Austrian companies.
Thanks, Christoph.
Okay.
We will also share your contacts for everyone who's interested further. Now, Reuben, we are close to the end. There's not many questions being asked. Maybe if we covered it all. I would like to ask you to maybe give a last, perspective with regards to is India going back to normal in the near future? I mean, back to normal in terms of post-COVID, but it was actually a very solid market, always complex, but dynamic and very interesting also for Austrian companies. And what will India do in terms of probably attracting companies that are here on the panel in the future and keep them, even in such a crisis, invested in the market?
Yeah. So I think first of all we've got to start by being honest. And the fact of the matter is that the decline in economic growth did not start with COVID. You had many quarters of declining economic growth, and over many years, the economic growth has actually been declining. So I think that's point number one. To the point that Thomas raised, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK, he didn't say very many funny things, but he said something that was equally funny and profound. He said, when it comes to the rule of law, the first 500 years are the hardest. And you know, I think that's a really, really important lesson for Indian policymakers to sort of take in, because at the end of the day, it is things like certainty, it is things like rule of law, it's like contracts, you know, respect for contracts. I think those are the things that really matter, and that's what will actually drive foreign investment into a country. So even in this comparison with China, for instance, the obsession consistently has been on the goal, right? We want to be as big as China, but there's absolutely no attention paid to the process, right? What is the process by which you get from point A to point B? That is not something, I mean, that's hard. I mean, there's no question that's a hard problem to crack. But unless you start addressing those kind of issues of what is the process that gets you from point A to point B, how do you have better dispute resolution mechanisms? How do you have you know, I mean, so things like retroactive taxation, right? I mean, this is a sort of thing that did enormous damage to the Indian business landscape, so to speak, because of just completely capricious decision making by the bureaucracy. So I think those are the sort of things that India needs to just admit are a problem. And you know, as I said earlier, you have to first admit the problem, and equally admit the fact that you have very limited state capability. So try and do a few things really well rather than do a bad job of 100 different things. So it's a little bit like, you know, when you think about smart cities, I mean, where was the need to announce 100 smart cities? How about doing 3 smart cities, but doing a really good job of it, right? So similarly, when it comes to special economic zones, I mean, China started with 4 economic zones, right? Of which the biggest was Shenzhen. Why not start with something smaller? Right? And prove that it works, and then that can act as demonstration and so on and so forth. And obviously, you know, in a democracy, and especially in a very chaotic democracy like India, and there's also very tough political economy considerations to take into account. And I think for all of those reasons, it is better to do, as I said, admit what the problems are and then systematically address it. And to me, the COVID or post-COVID environment is the biggest crisis India is facing since 1991. And it probably allows for the same kind of reset, the same kind of changes that happened in 1991 are possible today. But that can happen only if, as I said, you actually admit what the problems are and then try to take on those problems in a fashion that is actually you know, that takes into account the fact that you have limited state capability. And so do things on a smaller scale, but do it really well. And then have respect for the rule of law. I think those are the things that would actually make a difference.
Thanks, Reuben. Very interesting insights, and let's see whether COVID is actually going to give a push to those ways forward. I think I would leave it at that if the panel is happy with that, and the audience. I would like to thank all of you for this very interesting discussion. I think you can always go into more depth, but this was already a big achievement, you know, the insights you shared. And for the audience, I would just like to mention that we will send out feedback slides and also to the panelists, and we're always very appreciative of, you know, feedback and suggestions also on topics that we could continue discussing in those sort of web events. And then I would just leave it with that. Thanks a lot. And yeah, we're going to put the slides online and also recordings of this web event. And we hope to see you soon. You could sign up for the newsletter on our webpage if you want to keep participating and be updated about what we do and the events we launch. Thanks a lot to all of you. Have a good
Thank you very much.
Rest of the afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Right.